Ethan Caldwell had never been a man to back down from a challenge. At 35, he was the CEO of Caldwell Innovations, one of the most successful tech companies in the country. His world revolved around luxury, billion-dollar deals, fast cars, lavish penthouses, and a string of admirers who worshipped the ground he walked on. To outsiders, his life was perfect, but to those who truly knew him, Ethan was a man driven by competition, power, and an insatiable hunger to always win. So, when his longtime friend Damian Carter, a fellow entrepreneur with an equally inflated ego, smirked across the table at their usual VIP lounge and made a bet, Ethan barely hesitated. "I bet you can't do it," Damian said, swirling the whiskey in his glass, his eyes gleaming with amusement. Ethan raised a brow, intrigued. "Do what?" Damian leaned in, lowering his voice. "I bet you can't marry someone completely outside of our world. No supermodels, no influencers, no corporate women. I'm talking about a nobody. Someone ordinary." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "That's too easy." "But," Damian continued, grinning as he pointed to a woman nearby, "it has to be her." Ethan turned his head and followed Damian's gaze toward a young woman wiping down tables in the corner of the room. She wore a simple uniform, black pants and a burgundy polo shirt. Her chestnut hair was tied back in a ponytail, a few loose strands falling around her tired face. There was nothing flashy about her. Nothing that screamed the kind of woman who usually caught his attention. Harper Monroe. He had never seen her before, which wasn't surprising. He rarely noticed the waitstaff who worked in the places he frequented. But as he studied her, something about her stood out, the way she carried herself with quiet determination. The way her tired eyes still held a spark of resilience. She wasn't bitter or miserable, despite clearly working a demanding job. "She's a single mom," Damian added, the grin never leaving his face. "I overheard the other waitresses talking about it. Works double shifts to take care of her kid. Now that is a challenge, my friend." Ethan smirked, leaning back in his seat. "What's the wager?" Damian's laughter echoed through the lounge. $2 million. No tricks, no contracts, no prenuptial nonsense. A real marriage. Get her to say yes. Make it official, and the money's yours. $2 million was nothing to Ethan. He made that kind of money before lunch. But this wasn't about the cash, it was about the thrill. The game, the challenge. He had never lost a bet in his life. And he wasn't about to start now. With a confident smile, he stood up, straightened his expensive suit, and made his way toward Harper. As he approached, Harper barely spared him a glance. She was busy clearing plates, her movements efficient but tired. Ethan, who was used to people stopping whatever they were doing to acknowledge him, found this amusing. "Excuse me," he said smoothly, flashing his most charming smile. She looked up, her hazel eyes meeting his. For a split second, something flickered in them: surprise, wariness, curiosity, before she quickly masked it with professionalism. "Yes?" she asked, her voice polite but distant. "I don't think I've seen you here before," Ethan said. Harper let out a soft laugh. Not out of amusement but out of sheer disbelief. "I've been working here for over a year," she said, stacking empty glasses onto her tray. "You just never noticed." Ethan blinked, taken aback. No woman had ever spoken to him so bluntly. He was used to admiration, to people hanging onto his every word. But Harper, she didn't seem interested at all. This just made him more determined. "Well, I'd like to make up for lost time," he said smoothly. "How about coffee? Just a casual conversation." She raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "I don't have time for casual conversations. Everyone has time for coffee. Not when you're working 2 jobs and raising a 5-year-old. She shot back. For the first time in a long time, Ethan was caught off guard. He hadn't expected her to challenge him, to push back so effortlessly. Usually, women melted under his gaze. They leaned in, batted their lashes, giggled at his jokes. But Harper Monroe? She was different. "Okay," Ethan said, his interest growing. "So, if I ask you again tomorrow, would your answer change?" Harper sighed, clearly annoyed but trying to stay professional. "Probably not." But before she could turn away, he added, "I admire your dedication. Not everyone works this hard." That made her pause. For the first time, her gaze softened, just slightly. "Yeah, well, life doesn't really give me a choice," she murmured. Ethan filed that away in his mind. This was not going to be easy. And that was what made it exciting. As she turned and walked off, Ethan grinned to himself. The bet was on. The next day, Ethan returned, then the next, and the next. Each time, Harper met him with the same cool, uninterested demeanor. But Ethan was relentless. He left generous tips, made friendly conversation, and found small ways to earn her trust. He learned little things: how she took her coffee, how she always hummed under her breath when she was busy, how she worked extra hours on Fridays to afford small treats for her daughter, Lily. One evening, after weeks of persistence, he saw an opportunity. Harper was sitting outside on her break, rubbing her temples as exhaustion settled over her. Ethan approached, 2 coffees in hand. Without a word, he set one down in front of her. She looked at it, then at him, sighing. "You really don't give up, do you?" "Nope," he said, taking a seat across from her. She hesitated for a moment, then finally picked up the coffee and took a sip. "Fine," she muttered. "You get 10 minutes. Ethan smiled. It was a start. Ethan didn't know it yet. But this bet, the one he had taken so lightly, was about to change his life in ways he never could have imagined. Harper Monroe was not like the women he knew. She wasn't impressed by money. She didn't crave luxury. And she wasn't looking for a Prince Charming. She had spent years surviving on her own. And Ethan was about to learn a lesson that money could never buy. He thought this was just a game. But somewhere along the way, he was going to lose his heart. What do you think? Would you trust someone like Ethan? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this part of the story, hit like and subscribe for more. Harper Monroe had learned a long time ago that fairy tales weren't real, especially not for women like her. She didn't have the luxury of daydreams, of believing in second chances or charming princes. Her reality was made up of long shifts at a fast food restaurant, unpaid bills stacking on the counter, and the constant, gnawing fear that she wasn't doing enough for her daughter, Lily. Every morning, she woke up before the sun, her body aching, her mind already racing with the list of things she needed to get done. She'd wake Lily, brush the knots from her golden curls, dress her in hand-me-downs that were just a little too big, and walk her to daycare before rushing to work. It was a cycle that never ended. Work, Lily, sleep, repeat. She had no time for herself, no time for romance, and certainly no time for Ethan Caldwell. And yet, somehow, he had forced his way into her routine, appearing at the restaurant every day with that irritatingly charming grin, those expensive suits, and his ridiculous persistence. Harper didn't know what his game was. She had seen men like him before, arrogant, entitled, thinking they could have anything they wanted. He was probably bored with his rich, perfect life, playing a game where she was nothing more than the next challenge to be conquered. She had no intention of letting him win. But then, Lily got sick. It started as a small cough, something Harper barely noticed as she rushed through her morning routine. But by the time she picked Lily up from daycare that evening, her little girl was burning with fever. Harper's heart clenched with panic as she carried her daughter home, pressing a shaky hand to her forehead. Too hot. Way too hot. She couldn't afford a doctor's visit. The thought hit her like a brick to the chest as she rummaged through the medicine cabinet, finding nothing but half-empty bottles and expired cough syrup. Her paycheck wouldn't come for another week. The extra shifts she had taken still weren't enough to cover rent and food. Where was she supposed to find the money for a hospital visit? Lily's small body trembled as she curled into Harper's lap, her little fingers clutching at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, it hurts." Harper's throat closed with emotion, but she forced a smile, stroking Lily's damp curls. "I know, baby," she whispered. "I know. Just rest, okay?" She sat awake all night, rocking Lily, pressing cool cloths to her forehead, whispering prayers she wasn't sure anyone was listening to. By morning, her baby was worse. Harper's heart pounded as she checked her phone, her fingers shaking as she scrolled through her contacts. She had no one to call. Her parents had cut her off when she got pregnant. The friends she once had drifted away, tired of her always canceling plans to work or take care of Lily. There was only one name left on the list: Ethan. She stared at it for a long time, her pride warring with the desperation clawing at her chest. She hated him. She hated his stupid rich boy confidence, his insistence that he could fix anything with a checkbook, his smug persistence that she would eventually say yes to him. But right now, Lily needed her to swallow her pride. With a deep, shuddering breath, Harper pressed call. A man out of place. Ethan arrived faster than she expected. Less than 20 minutes after she hung up, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, he was standing there, looking completely out of place in his tailored suit, polished shoes, and concerned expression. Harper didn't have the energy to be embarrassed about the messy apartment, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, or the fact that she was still in her pajamas with dark circles under her eyes. "Where is she?" Ethan asked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Harper stepped aside, letting him in. He followed her to the tiny bedroom where Lily lay, her small body curled into a ball, her face flushed with fever. Ethan went completely still. For the first time since she'd met him, Harper saw something raw in his expression, something that looked an awful lot like guilt. "Why didn't you call me sooner?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Harper swallowed, crossing her arms. "Because I don't trust you." She didn't say it. She didn't have to. Ethan pulled out his phone. "I know a doctor. I'll have her seen right away." Harper wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't need his help. But when she looked down at her daughter, her beautiful, fragile little girl, she couldn't afford her pride anymore. She nodded. "Okay." Ethan took control like he always did. Within an hour, Lily was in a private clinic, being seen by the best pediatrician in the city. The doctor reassured Harper that it was a severe flu, but nothing dangerous, that Lily would be okay with medication and rest. Harper exhaled for the first time in 24 hours. She sat in the hospital chair, holding Lily's tiny hand as she slept, exhaustion weighing her down. Ethan sat beside her, watching her carefully. "Why didn't you tell me you were struggling?" he asked. Harper let out a humorless laugh. "Why would I? You don't live in this world, Ethan. You don't know what it's like to count every dollar, to choose between groceries and rent. You don't understand what it feels like to have no one to turn to." Something in his expression shifted. "You could have turned to me," he said quietly. Harper looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, she wondered if maybe she had been wrong about him. The next morning, Ethan made an offer that shook her world. "Marry me," he said, standing in the doorway of her tiny apartment, his blue eyes filled with something she couldn't quite read. Harper's heart stopped. "What? Marry me?" he repeated. "I can give you and Lily a better life. You won't have to work 2 jobs. You won't have to worry about bills. And Lily will have everything she needs." Harper stared at him, her mind reeling. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. People like Ethan didn't marry people like her. She opened her mouth to say no, to tell him that she didn't need his charity, that she didn't need him. But then she looked at Lily, sleeping peacefully in her bed, and she thought about the hospital bills, the daycare fees, the unpaid rent, and suddenly, the word that came out of her mouth wasn't no. It was, "Why?" Ethan hesitated, and for a moment, his mask slipped. "Because I think you're worth more than the life you've been given." Harper's breath caught. Her heart was pounding. She knew this was insane. She knew she should say no. But for the first time in her life, someone was offering her a way out. And as much as she hated it, she wasn't sure she could walk away. Harper Monroe woke up to the sound of silence. For the first time in years, she didn't wake up panicked, worried about being late for work or how she would scrape together enough money to pay for daycare. There was no blaring alarm clock, no cramped apartment filled with the stress of survival. Instead, there was a luxurious bed, soft sheets that felt too expensive beneath her fingers, and an eerie quiet that made her feel like she had somehow stepped into someone else's life. Because she had. Harper sat up, blinking at the massive bedroom around her, far too big, too extravagant, too unfamiliar. The curtains were drawn, revealing a breathtaking city skyline, a view so surreal that it almost made her dizzy. She wasn't in her tiny apartment anymore. She was in Ethan Caldwell's mansion, married to a man she barely knew. Her heart pounded. This wasn't a dream, it was real, and she had no idea if she had just saved herself and Lily, or made the biggest mistake of her life. The morning was a blur. Harper dressed quickly, choosing the simplest outfit she could find, a plain sweater and jeans. Though even those felt expensive compared to her usual thrift store wardrobe. When she stepped out of the room, she immediately regretted it. The mansion was huge, its hallways so long and pristine they felt like something out of a palace. The floor gleamed beneath her feet. The chandelier overhead sparkled like something from a fairy tale. and the sheer emptiness of it all made her stomach twist. She followed the scent of coffee until she reached a kitchen bigger than her entire apartment. And there he was. Ethan sat at the marble counter, dressed in a crisp suit, scrolling through his phone, looking every bit like the billionaire CEO he was. Effortlessly confident, perfectly put together, the complete opposite of her. "Morning," he said, not looking up. Harper hesitated. "Morning." He finally met her eyes. Something unreadable flickered across his face. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded, but the truth was, she had barely slept at all. Not because the bed wasn't comfortable, it was, but because the weight of everything that had happened in the past week sat like a stone on her chest. She had married Ethan Caldwell, a man she had spent weeks trying to push away, a man she had sworn she would never trust. And now, here she was, his wife. She wasn't sure if she wanted to laugh or cry. "Mommy." Before Harper could say another word, tiny feet came running into the kitchen. Lily, still in her pink pajamas, bounded into the room, her face lit up with excitement. Harper barely had time to crouch before her daughter launched herself into her arms. "Mommy, this house is huge," Lily gasped. "Did you see my room? It has a princess bed." Harper forced a smile, brushing a loose curl from Lily's face. "I saw, sweetheart." Lily pulled away, bouncing with excitement. "Mr. Ethan said we can go to the zoo today. And we can get ice cream after." And, Harper's stomach twisted. Mr. Ethan. Lily had always been careful around strangers, slow to trust, but somehow, she had already warmed up to him. The realization made Harper's breath catch. Ethan had everything: money, power, charm, and now, he had Lily's trust, too. What if she had just handed over the one thing in her life that mattered most? She glanced at Ethan, who was watching her with a look she couldn't quite place. Maybe it was pity. Maybe it was something else. Either way, she didn't like it. The first public appearance came quicker than Harper was prepared for. Ethan's assistant had called that morning, informing her that they were expected at a dinner event that evening, one she had never agreed to. She barely had time to react before an entire team of stylists arrived at the mansion. Armed with designer dresses, makeup brushes, and the ability to make her feel completely out of place in her own skin. By the time she was ready, she barely recognized herself. The dark blue dress clung to her figure in a way that made her feel exposed. Her hair was curled perfectly, her makeup flawless, but none of it felt like her. She was playing a role, pretending to be someone she wasn't. And Ethan? He looked at her like she was exactly who she was supposed to be. "You're stunning," he said, offering his arm. Harper hesitated. This was just part of the deal. That's all. Taking a deep breath, she placed her hand in his, and let herself be led into a world where she didn't belong. The moment they entered the lavish ballroom, Harper felt it. The stares, the whispers, the silent judgment. She didn't have to hear the words to know what they were thinking. Who is she? She doesn't belong here. Why would Ethan marry her? Her heart pounded. Ethan, of course, didn't seem to notice. He was effortless, greeting business partners, shaking hands, making charming conversation. Meanwhile, Harper felt like she was drowning. She barely touched the expensive food in front of her, barely said a word, but she felt the weight of every gaze, every side glance from women who were prettier, wealthier, and more polished than she would ever be. It wasn't until she excused herself to go to the restroom that she heard them talking. Two women, standing by the mirror, their voices dripping with amusement. "She's not even that pretty. She looks terrified. Poor thing. I bet she married him for the money." Harper froze. She knew she shouldn't care. She shouldn't let them get to her. But the truth was, they weren't wrong. Maybe she really was just the poor waitress Ethan married out of convenience. Maybe she was exactly what they thought she was. Her eyes burned. She turned quickly, ready to escape before the tears could fall, and walked straight into Ethan. He must have seen the look on her face, because his expression darkened. "What happened?" he asked, voice low. Harper shook her head quickly, forcing a smile. "Nothing. I just needed a moment." Ethan's gaze flickered over her shoulder, where the women were still whispering. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to, because in the next second, he did something she didn't expect. He took her hand, tightly, and led her back to the ballroom, straight into the center of the room, where everyone could see them. Harper's breath caught as he pulled her closer. And in front of everyone, under the golden glow of the chandeliers. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. A simple, silent promise. She wasn't alone. Not tonight. Not as long as he was here. Did Harper make the right choice marrying Ethan? Let us know in the comments. Harper never imagined that standing beside Ethan Caldwell would feel so exhausting. It wasn't the weight of the diamond ring on her finger or the sheer grandeur of his world. It was the constant judgment. It followed her everywhere. At the first charity gala, women in shimmering gowns watched her with thinly veiled amusement. At corporate dinners, executives whispered behind glasses of wine, their words coded in mockery and curiosity. She was the woman who didn't belong. The waitress turned wife. The outsider in Ethan Caldwell's perfect world. Harper kept her head high, smiled when expected, played the role of the supportive wife. But inside, she was drowning. And worst of all, she couldn't tell Ethan. She knew he meant well, that he was trying, but Ethan was too used to this world, too comfortable in it to see how much it was breaking her. Until the night everything fell apart. It was supposed to be a simple corporate dinner. Ethan had insisted she come, said he wanted her there, said she was part of his life now. She had been hesitant at first, but a small part of her wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that maybe she could find a place in this world after all. She should have known better. The evening started like all the others. Polished executives, elegant women, sparkling champagne. The conversations were filled with business jargon she didn't understand, but she smiled, nodded, stayed silent, until one of them decided to test her. Mrs. Caldwell, a sleek-looking woman with piercing green eyes, said, her voice smooth as silk but sharp as a blade, "What's your take on Caldwell Industries' recent acquisition?" Harper's stomach dropped. She had no idea what she was talking about. She hesitated. The woman's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. She knew Harper wouldn't have an answer. "I suppose business talk isn't really your area of expertise, is it?" she mused, tilting her head. The table laughed, not loudly, but just enough. Harper felt the heat rise to her face, her pulse pounding in her ears. She wanted to disappear. She looked at Ethan, hoping, praying, that he would step in. But he didn't. He was staring at his drink, jaw tight, doing nothing. Harper barely made it through the rest of the night. The moment they stepped inside the mansion, she ripped off her heels and turned to Ethan, her chest heaving. "Why didn't you say anything?" Ethan's brows furrowed. "Say anything about what?" She let out a bitter laugh. "About what, Ethan? They were humiliating me, right in front of you. And you just sat there." His expression hardened. "Harper, this is just how these things are. You have to learn to." "To what?" She cut in, her voice rising. "To stay quiet? To pretend it doesn't bother me?" Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "You're making this bigger than it is." She staggered back, his words hitting her like a slap. "Bigger than it is?" she whispered. "Do you have any idea what it's like to be constantly reminded that you're nothing more than a joke to these people?" His face flickered with something, guilt. Maybe, but it was too late. Because Harper was done. "I don't fit here, Ethan," she said, her voice shaking, "and I don't think I ever will." She turned on her heel and walked away, not waiting for him to follow. For the first time, Harper stopped trying. Stopped trying to fit in. Stopped trying to please people who would never accept her. Instead, she focused on the one thing that mattered. Lily. She spent more time at the park with her daughter. Away from the suffocating walls of Ethan's world. She reconnected with old friends. Remembered who she was before she had ever met him. And for the first time, she felt free. Until one afternoon, while Lily was coloring in the living room, Ethan walked in, holding a thick folder. "I have something for you," he said, setting it on the table. Harper frowned, flipping it open, and then she froze. Inside were dozens of business contracts, partnerships, plans. For her. "You said you didn't fit into my world," Ethan said softly, "so I decided to meet you in yours." Harper couldn't breathe. What is this?" she whispered. "A small business fund," Ethan said, "for single mothers, to help them start over. To help them do what you did." Harper's vision blurred with tears. She looked at Ethan, who, for the first time, looked uncertain. "I should have stood up for you that night," he admitted. "I should have defended you. But I want you to know, you don't need their approval." "You never did." Harper's chest ached. Because for the first time since marrying him, he finally understood. He finally saw her. The foundation launched within weeks. And suddenly, Harper wasn't invisible anymore. The media, the same people who once mocked her, now called her an inspiration. Women reached out, sharing their stories, their struggles. She wasn't just Ethan Caldwell's wife anymore. She was Harper Monroe, the woman who had built something of her own. And at the next charity event, when the same green-eyed woman sneered, "Oh, I see you're still around," Harper smiled. "Yes," she said calmly, "and this time, I'm not going anywhere." Ethan, standing beside her, simply smirked, because this time, he was the one proud to be by her side. What do you think? Did Harper do the right thing by standing her ground? Harper thought the worst was behind her. She thought she had finally proven her worth. She had fought against the whispers, the judgment, the sideways glances. She had found a way to build something of her own, to stand beside Ethan without feeling like a shadow. But nothing could have prepared her for the ultimate betrayal. Because when she least expected it, she discovered the truth about their marriage. And it shattered her. It started with a conversation she was never meant to hear. Harper had just returned from a meeting at the foundation when she walked into Ethan's office, ready to share her latest success. She had expected to find him alone, not deep in conversation with his closest friend. "Caleb." She froze at the doorway. Because she heard her name. "So it worked out for you after all," Caleb was saying, his tone amused. "I still can't believe you actually went through with it." Harper's stomach turned. Ethan sighed. "I told you, Caleb, that was a long time ago." Caleb laughed. "Yeah, but come on, a bet? Marrying her just to prove a point? And now, what? You actually care?" Harper's heart stopped. The room spun around her. "A bet?" She stepped inside, her voice cold as ice. "What did you just say?" Ethan's head snapped up, his eyes wide with panic. "Harper, tell me I misheard," she demanded, her voice shaking. "Tell me my marriage wasn't just a game to you." Caleb shifted uncomfortably. "I should go." Harper barely noticed him leave. She was too busy staring at Ethan, waiting for him to deny it. But he didn't. Instead, he ran a hand through his hair, looking guilty. "I can explain. You don't need to." Her voice broke. "I heard enough." She turned to leave, but he caught her wrist. "Harper, please," he begged. "It was before I knew you. Before I never meant for it to be like this." She ripped her arm away. "Don't you dare," she whispered. "Don't you dare act like this is nothing." Ethan looked helpless. "I was stupid, arrogant. I didn't think it would mean anything. But then you," he swallowed hard. "Then you became everything." Harper's chest ached. She wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that the man who had stood beside her, who had fought for her, wasn't the same man who had married her on a bet. But the pain was too much. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "You were my husband, my daughter's father, and the whole time, I was just a joke to you?" Ethan flinched. "It wasn't like that," he insisted. "Not after I got to know you. Not after." "After what?" she snapped. "After you decided I was worth something?" His silence was answer enough. Harper let out a shaky breath. "I can't do this, Ethan." His face paled. "Harper, please." She stepped back. "I need time. And if you have even the slightest bit of respect for me, you'll give it to me." And then she turned and walked away. Harper didn't go back to the mansion. She took Lily and stayed with an old friend, refusing to answer Ethan's calls, his texts, his desperate pleas to hear him out. But she couldn't. Not yet. She needed to breathe. She needed to understand how the man she had trusted more than anything had been lying to her from the start. She had given Ethan everything, her love, her faith, her family. And now, she didn't know if she could ever trust him again. Ethan felt like he was suffocating. For the first time in his life, he had lost something that actually mattered. The money, the power, the world he had spent years building, none of it meant anything if Harper wasn't beside him. He had never felt so empty. And it was his own fault. He had been a coward. He should have told her the truth long ago. He should have never let her find out this way. But he had. And now he had to fight to fix it. Not with words, but with actions. Weeks passed. Harper had ignored every attempt Ethan made to reach her. Until one morning, she received an unexpected email. From Ethan. It was a press release. Harper frowned as she clicked on the link, scanning the bolded words at the top of the page. Her breath caught in her throat. Ethan Caldwell sells majority shares of Caldwell Industries. Announces new philanthropic venture. Harper's hands shook as she kept reading. Ethan had stepped down from his position at Caldwell Industries. He had sold off the company he had spent years building, the company that had once defined his entire existence. And he had done it for her. At the bottom of the page, a quote from him read, "The person I love the most once told me that success isn't about wealth, it's about impact. So I'm choosing impact. And if she'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that she was never a game to me." Harper's vision blurred with tears. For the first time since she had walked away, she felt her walls begin to crack. Harper wasn't sure what to expect when she agreed to meet Ethan. But when she saw him, standing in the park where they had first taken Lily, looking more vulnerable than she had ever seen him, she knew. She still loved him, but love wasn't enough. "Why did you do it?" she asked quietly. Ethan swallowed hard. "Because I wanted to show you that this wasn't just about winning. That you weren't a bet to me. Harper, you never were." Her heart ached. She wanted to believe him. But trust wasn't built in a day. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she admitted. Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. "I know." He hesitated. "But if you ever decide you can, I'll be waiting." Harper exhaled, staring at the man who had broken her heart, but had also done everything to mend it. And in that moment, she knew. She wasn't ready yet, but maybe one day, she would be. Harper had thought she had seen the worst of it. She had thought that walking away from Ethan, leaving behind the love she had built, and rebuilding her life from nothing had been the hardest thing she would ever have to do. She was wrong, because nothing compared to the nightmare that was about to unfold. Nothing compared to the fight she would have to face to protect her daughter. And nothing compared to the ruthless power of those who wanted to take everything from her. It started with a letter. A cold, impersonal legal notice delivered to her doorstep, stamped with the one name that sent ice through her veins. Eleanor Caldwell, Ethan's mother, the woman who had always hated her, the woman who had never accepted her, and now, the woman who was trying to take her daughter away from her. Harper's hands shook as she read the words on the paper, her heart pounding in her chest. Petition for custody. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. It was as if the floor beneath her had disappeared, and she was falling into an abyss she could never escape. The court must consider what is in the best interest of the child. Given Harper Mitchell's unstable financial situation and lack of resources, full custody should be awarded to Ethan Caldwell and his family. The words burned into her soul like a brand. They weren't just taking her to court. They were calling her unfit. Harper had done everything for Lily. She had worked tirelessly to give her a good life, to make sure she never felt the struggles Harper had endured. She had sacrificed, she had fought, and now, all of it, was being questioned by people who had never lifted a finger for her daughter. She stared at the papers in disbelief, her breath coming in shallow gasps. This isn't happening. This can't be happening. But it was. Tears welled in her eyes as she gripped the letter. Her mind racing. She had to fight, even if it meant going up against one of the most powerful families in the country. Even if it meant standing alone. Because no one was taking her child away from her. Harper stormed into Ethan's office, her hands clenched into fists. The legal document crumpled in her grasp. She didn't knock, didn't care. She had nothing left to lose. Ethan looked up from his desk, startled by the rage and desperation in her eyes. "Harper?" She threw the papers onto his desk. "Read it," she hissed. Ethan frowned, picking up the document. As he scanned the words, his expression hardened, his jaw tightening, his fingers curling around the edge of the paper. Then he looked up, and for the first time, Harper saw guilt. He knew. He had known this was coming. "You knew," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Didn't you?" Ethan closed his eyes. "Harper." Her heart shattered. "You knew." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Of course you knew," she muttered. "You stood there, pretending you were sorry, pretending you cared. But the whole time, your mother was planning this." Ethan stood, his hands reaching for her. "I swear to you, I didn't agree to this. I would never." "Then stop it." Her voice shook with anger and pain. "Tell her to stop. Tell your mother that you won't let this happen." Ethan hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Harper saw everything in that single moment of hesitation. He was still one of them. Still his mother's son. Still too afraid to defy the people who controlled his world. Her vision blurred with tears. "I hate you," she whispered. "I hate you for making me believe you were different. Ethan flinched as if she had slapped him. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Harper, please." She turned back, her eyes burning with fury. "No." Her voice was shaky but strong. "I am going to fight for my daughter. And I am going to win. With or without you." The courtroom was cold and unforgiving. Harper sat at her table, her hands trembling beneath the desk. On the other side of the room, Eleanor Caldwell sat, composed and smug, her expensive lawyer whispering in her ear. And beside her, looking miserable and torn, sat Ethan. Harper's heart twisted at the sight of him, but she pushed it away. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about Lily. She lifted her chin, determined to show no weakness. But when Eleanor's lawyer stood and began to speak, her stomach knotted with fear. "Your Honor, we are here today to determine the best environment for young Lily Caldwell. Our client, Eleanor Caldwell, along with her son, Ethan, have the means and stability to provide a life of security, opportunity, and privilege for this child. Unfortunately, we cannot say the same for Ms. Harper Mitchell." Harper's nails dug into her palm. She knew what they would do. They would make her seem small, weak. They would paint a picture of a woman who wasn't enough. But they were wrong. When her lawyer stood, his voice was steady and strong. "Your Honor, what determines a good parent isn't wealth. It's love, commitment, and sacrifice. And no one in this courtroom has given more of that than Harper Mitchell." Tears burned behind Harper's eyes. Because it was true. She had been everything to Lily. And she would prove it. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, the room fell silent. He stood, looking torn and conflicted, his gaze flickering between his mother and Harper. "Mr. Caldwell," the judge said, "do you believe your daughter is better off with your mother?" Harper held her breath. Ethan looked at his mother. Then at Harper. Then, finally, at Lily, who sat in the back of the courtroom, watching with innocent, trusting eyes. His voice was quiet but firm. "No." Eleanor gasped. Harper stared. Ethan cleared his throat. "My mother believes money is enough," he said, "but I've watched Harper. I've seen her raise Lily with love and patience. She is the best mother I could ever hope for my child to have." Eleanor rose to protest, but Ethan's voice cut through the air. "And I won't be a part of taking that away." The judge ruled in Harper's favor. The moment it was over, Harper felt her entire body sag with relief. She turned to her daughter, scooping her into her arms, holding her tight. Lily giggled, wrapping her small arms around her neck. "Mommy, we won?" Tears slipped down Harper's cheeks as she whispered, "Yes, baby, we won." She looked up, her gaze landing on Ethan. He stood there, watching her, his expression raw and filled with something she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, regret, maybe even love. But this time, Harper knew, she didn't need him to win. She had done this on her own. And for the first time in her life, she felt free. Do you think Harper was right to fight for Lily? Let us know in the comments. Harper had won. The custody battle was over. Lily was safe. And yet, even as she held her daughter in her arms that night, feeling the warmth of her tiny body curled up against her, her heart still ached. She had fought with everything she had, stood in that courtroom, and refused to back down, even when it felt like the world was against her. She had proved her worth as a mother, as a woman who had built her life from nothing, and as someone who would never let wealth or power take away what she loved most. But why did it still hurt so much? Why did she still feel like a part of her had been left behind? The days after the court ruling were strangely quiet. No more lawyers. No more fear of losing Lily. No more sleepless nights, clutching legal documents with trembling hands. But there was also no Ethan. He had walked out of the courtroom that day without a word. No congratulations. No apologies. No promises. Just silence. And Harper told herself that was what she wanted. She had fought without him. She had won without him. So why did his absence feel like a loss? One afternoon, as Harper and Lily sat on the couch reading, her daughter looked up at her with those same deep brown eyes that reminded her so much of him. "Mommy," Lily asked, tilting her head, "where's Daddy?" Harper felt her chest tighten. She smoothed Lily's hair gently, forcing a smile. "Daddy's busy right now, sweetheart." Lily's little face scrunched up in confusion. "But he was at court," she said, "and he said you were the best mommy ever. He said he didn't want to take me away. So why isn't he here?" Harper swallowed the lump in her throat. She had no answer. How could she tell her daughter the truth? That even though Ethan had finally chosen them over his mother, he had still walked away. That after everything, he had still left her behind. Lily's tiny fingers played with the hem of Harper's sweater as she whispered, "I miss him." Harper's heart broke all over again. She had promised herself she would never need Ethan Caldwell. But that didn't mean their daughter didn't need her father. And deep down, no matter how much she tried to deny it, she still missed him too. Harper told herself that time would make it easier. That each day without him would feel less like an ache, less like something was missing. But everywhere she turned, there was a reminder of him. The way Lily scrunched her nose when she was deep in thought, just like Ethan did. The scent of his cologne still faintly lingering on the coat he had left behind. The memory of his voice, raw and desperate, telling the judge that she was the best mother Lily could ever have. Harper hated how much she still loved him. Because after everything he had done, after the lies, the betrayal, the hesitation, she knew he had changed. She had seen it in the way he fought against his mother. In the way he had defied the wealth and power that once controlled him. In the way he had looked at her that last day in court. Like she was everything he had ever wanted. And yet, he had still let her go. 3 weeks had passed since the court ruling when there was a knock at the door. Harper wasn't expecting anyone. Her breath hitched as she approached the door, her heart already knowing who it was. She opened it, and there he stood, Ethan, looking tired, looking lost, looking like a man who had finally realized what he had lost. Harper gripped the doorframe, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" Ethan swallowed hard, his gaze flickering over her face, searching for something, hope. "Maybe. I don't know how to stay away from you," he admitted, his voice hoarse and raw. Harper's breath caught, because it wasn't just a line. It was the truth. She could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, in the way his hands shook slightly at his sides. This wasn't the arrogant businessman she had once known. This was a man who had been broken. A man who had lost everything, and now realized she was the only thing he wanted to fight for. Harper should have closed the door. Should have told him that it was too late. That he had already made his choice. But she couldn't. Because deep down, she had always been waiting for him to come back. Tears burned her eyes as she whispered, "You left." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes pleading. "I was scared." His voice cracked, and Harper had never seen him so vulnerable. "I was terrified that I would never be enough for you," he admitted, "that no matter how hard I tried, I would always be the man who failed you, the man who hurt you." Harper's throat tightened. "You were," she whispered. "You did hurt me, Ethan, more than I ever thought possible." His face crumbled at her words, and she knew he had been carrying that guilt every single day since the trial. "But," she hesitated, her voice shaking, "but you were also the man who stood up for me when it mattered. The man who chose me and Lily over your family. The man I—" She stopped. Could she say it? Could she admit what her heart had known all along? Ethan stepped even closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you still love me, Harper?" A tear slid down her cheek. And in that moment, she let the walls fall. "I never stopped." Ethan didn't hesitate. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing away the tear that had fallen. And then, he kissed her. A kiss that held every regret, every unspoken apology, every ounce of love that had been waiting for its moment to break free. Harper melted against him, letting herself feel everything. The warmth of his hands. The rapid beat of his heart against hers. The overwhelming certainty that despite everything, this was where she belonged. With him. With their daughter. With the man who had finally learned what it meant to fight for love. That night, as Ethan sat with Lily, reading her a bedtime story, Harper watched them from the doorway. Her heart was full. For the first time in years, she felt peace. She had fought so hard to protect Lily. She had fought so hard to protect herself. But maybe, just maybe, some battles were meant to be fought together. And this time, she wasn't fighting alone. Ethan had spent months proving himself. Months of patience. Months of showing up. Months of fighting for the family he nearly lost. And now, as he stood outside Harper's small house, a ring in his pocket, his heart pounded harder than it ever had in his life. This wasn't just about winning her back. This was about proving that he deserved her. That he deserved Lily. That he was no longer the man who had let them go. Tonight, he was going to ask Harper to be his wife again. Harper had seen it. She had seen the transformation in Ethan over the past few months. At first, she had kept her distance. Wary, guarded, she couldn't just let him back in. Not after the betrayal. Not after the lies. But Ethan had been relentless, not in words, but in actions. When Lily had the flu and Harper was exhausted, he had shown up with soup, medicine, and a quiet determination to help. When he had promised Lily he would be at her school recital, he was there, front row, cheering the loudest. When Harper had been overwhelmed with work, he had stepped in without being asked, taking care of Lily like it was the most natural thing in the world. And every single day, he had proved that he wasn't leaving again. That this time, he was here to stay. Harper had spent so long waiting for the moment when she could finally trust him again. And now, standing in her kitchen watching him help Lily with her homework, she realized, she already did. That evening, after putting Lily to bed, Harper walked into the living room, where Ethan sat nervously, fidgeting with his hands. She could tell something was on his mind. "What's wrong?" she asked. Sitting across from him, Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes searching hers. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I need you to listen before you decide anything." Harper's stomach twisted. Ethan had worked so hard to rebuild their trust. What could he possibly need to say now? "Okay," she said cautiously. "I'm listening." He took another breath. And then, with the most vulnerable expression she had ever seen on him, he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Harper's breath caught. "No, not yet." Her hands trembled as he slowly opened the box, revealing a ring, not a massive, flashy diamond like the one he had first given her years ago, but something simple, elegant, real, just like the love they had fought so hard to rebuild. Harper's heart pounded. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I know," he said softly, cutting her off. "I know what you're thinking. That it's too soon. That we still have a long way to go." He looked down for a moment, gathering his courage. "But Harper, I've spent every single day since the trial proving to you that I won't leave again. That I'm not that man anymore. And I will keep proving it to you. For as long as it takes." He lifted his gaze, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to rush you. I don't want you to say yes if you're not ready. But I want you to know that when you are, when you finally believe that this is real." He swallowed hard, his voice breaking. "I'll be here, waiting for you, because you and Lily, you're my family. And I don't ever want to spend another day without you." Tears spilled down Harper's cheeks. Because this wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a desperate plea. It was the most honest thing she had ever heard from him. And that scared her more than anything. Because she knew, deep down, she still loved him. Harper stared at the ring, her mind spinning. This was the moment where she could either forgive him completely, or walk away forever. But the truth was, she had already made her choice. Not in this moment, but in all the moments that led up to it. In the way she had let herself laugh around him again. In the way she had started to miss him when he wasn't there. In the way her heart still ached for him. Slowly, she reached forward, and closed the box. Ethan's expression fell. Harper immediately shook her head. "No, not like that," she said, her voice soft. "I'm not saying no." His eyes flickered with hope. I need time," she admitted. "I need to be sure. I need Lily to be sure. And if you're really willing to wait." Ethan let out a deep breath, relief washing over his face. "I'll wait as long as it takes. Harper," he said without hesitation. And Harper knew, for the first time in their entire story, he truly meant it. Months passed, and every single day, Ethan continued to show Harper that he was worthy of her trust. There were no broken promises, no empty words, only patience, effort, and a love that had survived every storm. And one evening, as they sat on the porch watching Lily play, Harper realized something. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't waiting for him to prove himself. She wasn't questioning if she could trust him, because she already did. And that night, as they tucked Lily into bed and Ethan turned to say goodnight, Harper stopped him. She took a deep breath and placed the velvet box back in his hands. His eyes widened. "Harper," he whispered. She smiled, her heart finally at peace. "You asked me to let you know when I was ready," she said softly. "Well, Ethan?" She gently opened the box, took the ring, and placed it in his palm. "I'm ready." And as Ethan slid the ring onto her finger, holding her hand like it was the most precious thing in the world, Harper knew This time, they had finally gotten it right. Their wedding wasn't grand. It wasn't filled with extravagance. It was simple, intimate, real. Lily stood between them, grinning as she watched them exchange vows, because she already knew what they had taken years to learn. That love wasn't about money. It wasn't about power. It was about choosing each other, over and over again. And as Harper and Ethan kissed, sealing the beginning of their new forever, she felt free, because they had walked through the fire. And in the end, they had come out stronger. The sun had just begun to set, painting the sky with streaks of pink and gold as Harper stood by the kitchen window, watching Lily play outside with Ethan. Laughter echoed through the yard as he chased her around, scooping her up in his arms and twirling her through the air. Their daughter's giggles filled the space between them, and for the first time in years, Harper felt something she had almost forgotten: peace. It hadn't been an easy road. There had been moments of doubt. There had been nights filled with quiet tears. There had been times she had wanted to walk away, fearing she would never truly heal from the past. But Ethan had stayed. He had fought for their family every single day. And now, watching him with Lily, seeing the way he had transformed not just as a man, but as a father, she knew she had made the right choice. A year had passed since the night Harper finally said, "I'm ready." Their wedding had been simple, just the three of them, standing in a field of wildflowers, with the sun setting behind them. No extravagant decorations, no crowded ballroom, no lavish spending, just love, just family, just a promise to never let go again. Since then, their lives had changed in ways neither of them had ever expected. Ethan had left behind the empty world of corporate power and dedicated himself to something real, giving back. He started a community project, helping struggling families like Harper and Lily once had been, offering job training, financial support, and mentorship programs. For the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't chasing profit, he was chasing purpose. And Harper? She had gone back to school. For years, she had put her own dreams on hold to survive, to make sure Lily had everything she needed. But now, with Ethan's support, she was finally doing something for herself. She studied social work, determined to help other women who had been in her shoes, single mothers, struggling families, people who just needed someone to believe in them. Life wasn't perfect. They still had hard days. They still had fights. But the difference now was, they never gave up on each other. They had learned that love wasn't just about passion or grand gestures. It was about choosing each other, every single day, even when it was hard. One evening, as they were finishing dinner, Ethan's phone buzzed with an unexpected call. He frowned at the name on the screen: Caleb. The man who had started the bet. The man who had nearly destroyed his chance at happiness. Harper noticed the tension in Ethan's face and reached for his hand. "Who is it?" she asked softly. He sighed, hesitating. "It's Caleb." She frowned. "You haven't talked to him in over a year. Why now?" Ethan shook his head, conflicted. "I don't know, but I think I need to find out." Harper studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Do what you need to do." Ethan stepped outside and took a deep breath before answering the call. "Caleb." There was silence on the other end before a heavy sigh. "Ethan, I owe you an apology." Ethan blinked in surprise. Caleb had never apologized for anything in his life. "I was wrong," Caleb continued. "I used to think life was just a game, that we could play with people like pieces on a chessboard. But watching what you did, seeing how you changed," he hesitated, "it made me realize something. I don't have anything real in my life. No real friendships, no family, nothing that actually matters." Ethan leaned against the porch railing, his heart pounding. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need to change," Caleb admitted, his voice raw. "And you're the only person I know who actually did." Ethan exhaled slowly. If someone had told him a year ago that Caleb would come to him for advice, he wouldn't have believed it. But now? Now he understood. "Then start now," Ethan said simply. "Start by doing something that actually means something." Caleb was silent for a moment. Then, finally, he said, "Thank you, Ethan. And, I'm sorry for everything." As Ethan hung up, he felt something shift inside him. He had spent so much time righting his own wrongs. And now, somehow, his change had inspired someone else. Maybe that was what life was really about. A few months later, Harper walked into their bedroom, holding a small object in her hands. Ethan looked up from his laptop and immediately noticed the emotion in her eyes. "What's wrong?" he asked. Concerned. She took a deep breath and handed him a tiny, folded up paper. Ethan opened it slowly. His breath caught in his throat. It was a pregnancy test. Positive. His eyes shot to hers, searching for confirmation. "Harper?" She nodded, her smile trembling. "We're having a baby." For a moment, he couldn't speak. His mind flashed back to where they had been just a few years ago, broken, lost, unsure if they could ever fix what had been shattered. And now? Now, they were building something new. Ethan wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, holding everything they had fought so hard for. "We're going to do this right," he whispered. From the very beginning, Harper pulled back just enough to look at him, her eyes filled with certainty. "I know." Months later, as Ethan held his newborn son for the first time, he felt a wave of gratitude so deep it nearly brought him to tears. This child, this moment, this family, it was everything he had never known he needed. Harper sat beside him, watching as Lily gently touched her baby brother's tiny hand. "He's perfect," Lily whispered. Ethan smiled, pressing a kiss to her head. "Just like you." And in that moment, he knew, everything he had been through, every mistake, every lesson, had led him here. To love, to family, to a life that wasn't built on pride or money, but on something real, something that would last forever. This story is about growth. It's about forgiveness. It's about learning that love isn't just about passion, it's about effort. Ethan wasn't a perfect man. He made mistakes, big ones. But instead of running from them, he faced them. He put in the work. And in the end, he didn't just win Harper's love. He earned it. And that's what love truly is. It's not words. It's not promises. It's actions. Because at the end of the day, the only love that lasts is the love that is fought for. What do you think? Did Harper make the right choice in forgiving Ethan? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, hit like to show your support. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful and emotional stories. Because love, redemption, and second chances are what truly make life worth living.